Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Savani Campos. At CTLN, we have a video interview segment called CTLN Opinion Plus. Once a week, we interview a Connecticut elected or appointed official. We discuss current events and questions the Latino community are curious to know. Today, we have Interim Director of Disability Rights Connecticut, Bob Joondeph. He has dedicated his professional life to protecting the rights of people with disabilities. He served as the Director of Disability Rights Oregon for over 30 years, representing people with disabilities on the state and federal level. In March, he took over the position of Interim Director of Disability Rights Connecticut. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Savani.
What is the mission of Disability Rights Connecticut?
Well, Disability Rights Connecticut is dedicated to protecting the rights of individuals with disabilities in the state of Connecticut. So we're a nonprofit law office, one of a network of 57 protection and advocacy organizations that are one in every state and territory of the country. And so we are primarily funded by the federal government to protect the legal rights of people with disabilities in the state of Connecticut.
There is a large population of Latinos living in Connecticut, some of them with disabilities. What is something that the Latino community needs to know about Disability Rights Connecticut?
Well, like every citizen or resident of Connecticut, it's important to know that people with disabilities have legal rights, and those rights are not to be discriminated against on the basis of their disability. And those rights can affect their lives in a variety of ways, beginning with really from birth all the way through the life process. And for citizens and residents from the Latino community, those rights are of equal treatment are in addition to rights that might attach based upon their other characteristics, as I would put it. So we at Disability Rights Connecticut each year set out a group of priorities and focus areas that we particularly want to work on to help improve the rights of all citizens with disabilities in Connecticut. In order to do that for the Spanish-speaking community, we have bilingual staff, and we who are ready to respond to people who call us or contact us through email or letter or whatever other means with problems in order to find out what the problem is and if there's something we can do about it. We also have publications that inform people about their rights and how to address them, and those are available in both English and Spanish.
We are currently living through a pandemic. How is this affecting the work that you do?
Oh, in these strange times where we're all hunkering down and trying to get through it as best we can, there's particular areas where people with disabilities are directly affected. I'll give you a few examples, if you don't mind, because sometimes you may not think of them if you're not experiencing them. We recently represented a woman with a brain injury who was in a hospital in Connecticut, and she was not allowed to have visitors because the hospital said, well, because of COVID, we don't let anyone other than staff into the hospital. But in her situation, she couldn't communicate with healthcare professionals. She felt highly isolated and confused and really needed to have someone who she was used to working with and knew from the outside come in to visit her with all the required protective equipment and so forth to make sure that no one was harmed. Disability Rights Connecticut stepped in and was able to file a federal complaint and get a settlement with the state of Connecticut that mandated that people with disabilities who have special needs who are in the hospital can have a helper or loved one come in under circumstances in which they need them. That's one example. Another example is the recent situation having to do with face masks and the governor's requirement that people wear face masks when they go into businesses. There was an exception called a reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities who, because of their disability, cannot wear a face mask. And that disability might be difficulty breathing. There's people who are scared by the face mask because of their limited understanding or have other problems associated with that. When certain political groups heard that people with disabilities could get that accommodation, they decided that they would fake having a disability. They would present themselves to the business, say, I have a disability, so let me in without a face mask, basically exploiting a law designed for people with disabilities. So from that, the governor decided that, well, he would address that by requiring anyone claiming to have a disability to have a doctor's note describing that. And of course, that put a greater burden on people who legitimately have that disability and need. And so this is an ongoing dispute, actually. But the important thing to note here is that everyone has a right to be safe. Everybody has a right to receive services. And if you have a disability, you can receive services from a business. If you can't go in, you have a right to receive those services another way. For example, to have those goods brought out to the curb rather than having to go in and risk your safety in order to get them. So that's yet another example of how that's come up. A last one that folks may not think about too much has to do with rationing of healthcare. And this may come up when we hopefully have a vaccine. So the question will be, well, who gets the vaccine first? And will people who traditionally have had their lives devalued based upon their disabilities, say intellectual disability or mental illness or other type of disability, are they going to be overlooked or be last on the list to receive care? And so these are very important issues for us and our client community.
You mentioned that certain political groups have tried to take advantage of not wearing a mask or the stuff things like that.
Yes.
With the election coming up, are there certain things on Connecticut's ballots that the community should be concerned and aware about?
Well, I think that the most important thing that people should be concerned about is voting. That everyone who has this wonderful right to participate in their democracy should vote and should take advantage of that opportunity and be given an easy way to do so. And so earlier this year, there was a question about whether people would be able to vote by mail more easily than has happened in the past in Connecticut. So in Connecticut, of course, is a state where in the past you've had to have an excuse in order to vote by mail. We advocated for there being greater access to vote by mail. Secondly, so if you do vote by mail, can you actually drop off your ballot? What we found was that Connecticut had created ballot drop-off boxes, but many communities were placing those boxes in somewhere where it was difficult for a person with a mobility issue to access. In one case, one town in Connecticut, we threatened them with legal action if they didn't place their box in an accessible location. So there was an example of just having governmental action which was impeding or interfering with the right to vote. But even with voting by mail, there's questions about can a person with a vision impairment or some limitation in their physical ability to write, can they use that paper ballot? Or is there another way that they can vote privately at home in order to participate in voting? And these are issues that we're still working on. In other words, having a system whereby people can vote more easily, more readily, and there aren't impediments placed in their way because a large percentage of people can use one device, we're not going to worry about the rest of the people. No, we want everybody to vote. And so that's where we're putting our energies. We don't take positions on voting matters usually. We're nonpartisan. What we really want to do is encourage everyone to vote, to everyone to have equal access to democracy.
We've been dealing with very polarizing times, I believe, both, I guess, in every level. And I feel like I wouldn't be being honest if I didn't ask this question. Is there racism in the accessibility of wheelchairs, of care that people of for people of color in the disabled community?
This is what I'd say about that, Savani. I think that there are great economic barriers for people who are poor or have limited income. There are financial barriers, and when a person needs access to a wheelchair or other assistive devices, financing can be an impediment. Having access to public support for those devices can be an impediment. Even public health insurance has limitations on what types of devices and how much they will pay for those devices. So the financial piece can be difficult. It can be difficult if you live in an area where it's more difficult. It's harder to get to the place you need to get the services that you need as well. So these social, the term social determinants of health, well, they very much apply to assistive devices and medical devices and those services, as well as what we think of as regular health care access. So I think I would put those in the same category of systemic impediments for people.
And how do we fix that? How do we, this is the last question I'm going to ask, but how do we go about fix that in theory and in practice?
Well, again, I was trying to answer that question by answering the earlier question: is participation in the public system. Voting absolutely makes a difference. These are what I was just describing are publicly financed systems. Our healthcare system is strongly publicly financed. That means that when you vote for representation, that it affects how our public money is spent. And that's the first thing. The second thing is that along with having good public representatives, we need to enforce our civil rights laws. So if a person is running into a problem that they feel that there is an injustice that's going on, being ready to complain about it. I think that, and again, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think that many of the people who I've represented over the years who come out of Latinx backgrounds or immigrants or have problems with documentation, those sorts of issues, are hesitant to assert their rights. It may have to do with relationship to authority that they've experienced. It may be fear of exposure. There may be language or other communication barriers. So it kind of takes a little more courage to step up or to find ways to do that through a representative, but that's what it takes.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Director Joondeph, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
It's been my pleasure.
Tune in next week for another episode. Follow us on Twitter at CTLN News, at Instagram at CT_Latino News. I'm Savani Campos with CTLN Opinion Plus. See you next time.